Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing which ceiling array is right for you. But before we get into that, just a few items of housekeeping. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. It takes us about a week or so to get it edited, but once it's edited and ready, you'll be able to find it at shure.com/webinars. Once again, that is shure.com/webinars. That's also a great place to go to see all of our past webinars. We have a lot of great webinars on a lot of great different audio topics, so please feel free to go there and peruse all of our past sessions. It's also a great place to see all of our upcoming webinars, so that's shure.com/webinars. And then one other note about the recording, we'll also send an email to all of the registrants with the link to that video once it's ready. So wait for your email too if you're waiting for that recording. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the Q&A section. Type in any questions you have, but please be patient. We will get to those at the end of the session. Speaking of the session, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing today. So today I am joined by two colleagues and friends. We are joined by Evan Groom, who is a product manager for Microflex Advance, and we're joined by Chris Lyons, who is our senior manager of Global Integrated Systems Marketing. And they're going to be taking us through a great agenda. We're going to be starting by setting the stage. Then we'll be talking about why would you even want to put things in the ceiling. We'll talk about some considerations, your options, and then, as I mentioned, we'll dive into that Q&A. So without further ado, let's get into it. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thanks, cool. Cheryl. Yeah. Great to be here. And Evan, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about setting the stage. First of all, we just got back from InfoComm 2023. So if anyone was there at the show, thanks for coming by the Shure booth and talking to us. It's always fun to meet with our dealers and end users. Evan, the real news of the show for us was MXA 902 launch, right?
Yep, that's the new entrance into the MXA category. And actually, by the way, that's what you're hearing me through as well. I'm using an MXA 902. So this is a good chance for you to hear how the microphone sounds. But yeah, while this webinar really isn't a detailed overview of any MXA or STEM product in general, we thought it would be good just to talk for 2 minutes about what this new product is, because at the end, we're going to be comparing all of the ceiling options, and if you don't know what the 902 is, then you wouldn't have the background to understand that comparison. So we want to just chat for like 30 seconds about what this new product is.
Right. So first, let's set the stage here and just kind of talk a little bit about history here. If we can go to the next slide there, Cheryl. You know, for some people, ceiling mics are old hat. They've been doing it for a long time. But, you know, let's just talk about why would you even want to put microphones on the ceiling? And of course, I've been here long enough where I remember the times when we told people, please don't put microphones on the ceiling, do anything but that, because it was usually a recipe for trouble. But, you know, there are some compelling reasons to put microphones on the ceiling. So let's talk about why you'd want to do that. We can just go to the next one there. So what are some of those things, Evan? Why are people so set on ceiling microphones?
Yeah, I think there's been a long-standing trend of just getting things off tables in meeting spaces. You got a picture there on the bottom left there showing a nice cluttered workspace, and that just really isn't good for an optimized meeting experience. There's just a lot of distractions, things in the way. It can, from like an acoustic perspective, it can cause you know, audio from, you know, your voice to be reflected in a non-acoustically ideal way. So I think we've really kind of seen this trend from table to both wall and ceiling mounted microphones. So
yeah, and I just want to point out, when I always bring a notepad to a meeting, it doesn't block anything. It's just fine. But
that's right.
People these days with their laptops, it's like a big game. So, you know,
that's right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, traditionally or in the past, you know, we were bending over backwards to help people install hanging choir microphones and, you know, sometimes even boundary microphones on the ceiling. And it was always a trial and a frustration, because it was a heck of a lot of effort, and the results were always kind of disappointing. It never really, had the sound quality and the interactivity that people were really going for. But people kept trying. Nobody ever gave up. But with the advent of array microphone technology, that all changed, and
Yeah.
you could actually make it work really well. And now there's lots of benefits to putting microphones on the ceiling.
Yeah, that's true. And to tie back to some of the points I was talking about before, here listed some of the benefits there. Just from an aesthetic viewpoint alone, they just look, it looks better to have stuff not on the table. So it's up and out of the way. Sometimes you don't even know that it's kind of in the room because just how they're installed. But also that third bullet point, all of your cabling is now hidden above. If you have a drop ceiling or a hard ceiling, all your cabling is like tucked away. You don't see any cabling. It's super clean. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to being in the ceiling. So, and that last bullet points from like a technical perspective makes a lot of sense because now you have this kind of equity among the participants in the room where the microphone is equally equidistant to all the participants in the room. So as opposed to being outside of a coverage of a tabletop gooseneck or something like that. And that's also another benefit of the ceiling mic is you're not tethered really to the table. You can really kind of walk around the space freely. So
let's expand on that. On the next slide, we've got an animation here comparing what happens when you put the microphone on the wall at the front of the room versus on the ceiling above the table. And, like in a small huddle room where everybody is, just in a semicircle, a wall mic can work pretty well. But in a larger room with a rectangular table, you can't fight the laws of physics. And the fact is, somebody is closer to a wall mic and somebody's farther away. And depending on the distances, that can be a noticeable change, not only in level, but just in the acoustic sound of it, like how much room reverberation is picked up for those distant people and so forth. And they're also farther from the loudspeaker. So somebody's up close and getting blasted, and somebody's far away and maybe struggling to hear. And it's typical, typical to have some mismatches there. But an overhead microphone and an overhead loudspeaker fix all that because now you're roughly the same distance to everybody. And
Yep.
So you get consistent pickup across the board. So that's proving to be by far the most desired solution.
yeah,
for
and to
room miking.
take that a little bit further, unfortunately, usually the person who's arguably most important in any given meeting is sitting at the head of the table there, where the experience both from being picked up by the microphone or if it's an all-in-one bar from a loudspeaker kind of dispersion perspective, it's arguably the worst experience for the most important person in the room. So, and that's really another key benefit to being in the ceiling as well.
Right. I guess that doesn't say much for me. I usually sit the seat at the very front of the table that barely even shows up on camera.
Right.
So people
Exactly.
see my elbow or something. That's about it. Well, let's talk about considerations. So what, in choosing a ceiling array mic, now that there are multiple options available throughout the industry and from Shure, let's talk about what kinds of things you need to be thinking of that will guide you, one direction or another. And definitely, Evan, one of them is room size, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's something that's really important as you're beginning this selection process, especially if you're an on-site IT manager who's managing different room sizes. You might choose different MXA or STEM solutions based on that room size. And for example, and we'll talk about it in a minute, the new MXA 902 is really optimized for small to mid-sized rooms, where, for example, if you had a larger divisible complex space, you might move up to the MXA 920, which is kind of the scalable solution. So
right. So the dimensions of the room and the seating layout are going to have an impact on what you choose.
Exactly.
Camera tracking is another big one. A lot of people are trying to do advanced forms of camera tracking now, and some microphones give you more data about which person in the room or where in the room they are speaking from that can help to drive a camera tracking system. Other microphones give you more general information, like the talker is over there, but not a specific location. So depending on what you're trying to get done as far as camera tracking goes, whether you're looking for, just like this side of the room or that side of the room, or specific close-ups of one or two people, you need to make sure that the microphone is actually generating that type of information for you.
Yeah, and this isn't the camera tracking webinar, but I'll spend 10 seconds and just kind of explain that there's kind of two different ways you can achieve camera tracking. One is where the optics, or like the PTZ or the web bar, webcam, whatever it is doing the tracking within itself. It's not receiving information from a microphone. That's one way. The other way, and I think what we're talking about here, is when the camera system receives coordinates from the microphone itself to inform a change of view. So.
Yep. The point is, though, that if you know going in what your goals are, you'll get a better match between microphone and camera tracking system.
Exactly.
Another one is voice lift, which, in some rooms like the one in the picture where it's kind of a really oblong room and some people are seated so far behind other people that they can't really hear what questions are being asked at another part of the room. Voice lift can work very well, even with overhead microphones. Generally, this is in situations where you've got more than 30 feet between the talker in the back row and someone in the front row, or vice versa. And this creates a many-to-many sort of sound system, so everybody in the room's a talker and everybody in the room is a listener. But again, you need a ceiling mic that can deliver that, because you're going to need separate microphone pickup zones that are tied to separate distinct loudspeaker zones, so that you don't end up with feedback between the two. What are some of the places where these are commonly happening, Evan?
Yeah, so these are both camera tracking and voice lift. And by camera tracking, I mean the situations where it's receiving information from the microphone. Those are typically your larger, more complex spaces. This typically isn't happening in the small to mid-size space. This is really like training rooms, like really large boardrooms. Also in the education sector, like classrooms, kind of these large spaces where you need to cover a lot of distance with the microphone.
Yep. So this all comes down to the coverage of the microphone and how does it deliver coverage or capture of people in different places. Shure's got 4 different types of coverage at the moment. The newest one is multi-zone automatic coverage, which is what's in the MXA 920, where you can define distinct coverage zones, up to 8 of them, and say, I need to pick up here and there and here and there. And as you see, there's one with an X. You can even define a place and say, and I don't want to pick up from over here, because maybe that's a doorway or something that makes noise and you definitely don't want to hear it. But within each of those coverage areas, the microphone will automatically deploy pickup lobes depending on who's talking and where they are in that rectangle.
Yep.
So, it's completely automatic, but it gives you the flexibility of multi-zones for larger rooms and complex spaces. Now, Evan, what about single zone automatic coverage? That's what's in the MXA 902, which is kind of the same, but kind of different.
Yeah, so the difference being that it's a single zone, so you can't create those distinct individual sections that we see on the left hand. And once we get to the point of steerable coverage, I'll kind of explain the difference between multi-zone and steerable, because you might be thinking, well, they both have zones. So we'll get there in a second. But the single zone is what's present on the brand new MXA 902. And yeah, that's basically it. You get a box, and if I'm in that box, I'm a voice, I'm gonna be picked up by the microphone.
Right. And on the 920, the size of the boxes is adjustable. On the 902, it's not. It's fixed at 20 feet by 20 feet. So that's designed to cover a small to medium-sized room. And within that box, it'll shift microphone deployment as it needs to. but the 20 by 20 area is what you've got to work with.
Correct.
Now, steerable coverage is a little bit different, and the 920 lets you choose steerable coverage if you want to, and this is what the MXA 910 had when it first came out.
Yep.
So you've still got pickup lobes, but now you're doing you're manually putting them where you want, right?
Yep, exactly. And like, I guess one of the key differences between multi-zone and steerable coverage is that in multi-zone, you're getting a single auto mixed output, whereas with steerable coverage, you're getting individual lobe outputs. So the steerable coverage is really useful for like really tricky or complex spaces where you really need to fine tune what's happening in specific areas. To be clear, though, there's still beam forming going on in both multi-zone and single zone. It's not like those zones are just open all the time. There's still that beam forming process going on. It's just how much finite control do you want? So, yeah, as Chris said, the MXA 920 comes out of the box. Actually, in a single zone automatic coverage, it gives you a 30 by 30 box, but then you can create additional zones, but still keeping a single auto mixed output. And then you could turn it into the legacy mode, the steerable coverage, if you need to on the 920.
Right. And for some people, having those multiple audio outputs gives them more processing flexibility or to work with loudspeaker zones.
Exactly.
Now,
Yep.
on the stem ceiling microphone, it's sort of like a fixed beam width that is aimed down from the microphone, and you can adjust the width of it. It's either narrow, medium, or wide, but you can't change the placement of it. So it's aimed down from the mic, wherever the mic is, presumably over the center of the table, and depending on how big that table or how big the room is, you just adjust narrow, medium, and wide, but you can't say, well, I want it over there to the left or to the right. You're limited to directly underneath, which in lots of rooms is the logical placement of the microphone anyway. And if you don't have movable seating or anything like that, that may be all that you need. Sometimes the simple approach is the best. So it does give you some options. And if you've got a larger table or a larger seating area, then you may just add multiple stem ceiling mics and do a couple of them and achieve your coverage that way.
Yep, and if you're wondering which one of these types of coverage applies to which MXA or stem microphone, stand by. That's going to be a little bit later where we'll kind of cover that. We're just explaining the types of coverage at this point.
Right. So beyond coverage, beyond technical stuff in general, just for some clients, certification is a really big issue. Some organizations have standardized on a particular collaboration tool like Teams or Zoom or WebEx or whatever, and certification might be a policy. They want to use products that are certified for use with those, just to guarantee that you've got complete compatibility with controls and muting and indicators and signal levels and so on and so forth. For other customers, it's not a big deal. I mean, if the product works well with it, that's fine. They don't particularly care if it's certified or not.
Yeah, use a kick drum mic if you want, No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. But
no,
yeah,
don't do that.
Yeah, but the point of the certification is really peace of mind for the either the integrator who's managing the building that it's installed in, or the on-site IT guy. It's peace of mind that they're not going to spend a ton of time troubleshooting AV components.
Right. And speaking of the integrator, a lot of integrators are developing, on the next slide here, developing fairly complicated systems for their clients that are a mix and match of different manufacturers' components, different control systems for the room, and so on and so forth. And the MXA product line particularly lends itself to that, because you've got Dante audio outputs, you've got command strings, to report indications and status from the microphone, send commands to the microphone, and so forth. So if you're developing a more complicated system like that, MXA is a great choice, because it's kind of an open architecture that gives you lots of options to mix and match components. The STEM ecosystem is more of a closed architecture where STEM components are designed to work with other STEM components, and they work terrific together, but you don't have as much freedom to mix and match all kinds of things from all kinds of companies.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about product options specifically here. We've got 4 ceiling microphones now, 4 ceiling array mics. It's amazing to me that we're already at multiple products in this category, because it was just a few years ago that we had the MXA 910, and it seemed like, wow, how could you want more than that? But here we are. So,
well, and that really ties back to the point earlier in the presentation where we talked about the trend of being in the ceiling. Obviously, that trend is here to stay, and we need to keep developing solutions and enhancements for this application. So,
right. So let's talk about the MXA 920, which has only been out for a little over a year now. Lots of people have already used it though, so you might be familiar with it. And this one comes in both square and round form factors. Evan, you want to talk a little bit about next generation array architecture? Because that's sort of a vague term and we know what it means, but our customers may not.
Yeah, so the 920, was launched actually at Infocom last year, so we just had its anniversary. It's 1 year anniversary of the launch, and this did replace the 910. But yeah, that next generation array architecture is really an enhancement of the way that the beamforming goes on, and it's just a lot more intelligible and easier to control than it was before on the 910, and that's just what makes the 920 sound like a 920.
Right, with less need for equalization too.
Exactly.
So you can install this in most rooms and really not need to do much tweaking at all.
Exactly. Yep.
And then we mentioned multi-zone automatic coverage. And then, of course, on top of that, it's got built-in IntelliMix DSP. So you've got acoustic echo cancellation, noise reduction, automatic gain control, compressor limiter, EQ, and so on and so forth. So you can adjust everything as much as you need to, and it comes out of the box with both Teams and Zoom certification. So this is sort of the Swiss Army knife. If you need to do something complicated or something difficult or something big, 920 is really a great choice.
Yeah, and it's also the most scalable solution, I would say, in the MXA ecosystem. It's really the choice when you need 3 to 4 or more ceiling arrays in a space. It's really going to be the right choice. Is going to be MXA 920.
Yep. All right, let's talk about the 902. Looks just like a square 920, and mechanically it is. Yep. So same mounting hardware and all that sort of thing. The magic is on the back where you see that gray lump in the one corner there. That's where the loudspeaker is, all sealed up in a box like that.
Yep.
So this has got single zone automatic coverage technology, but has the built-in loudspeaker, which has nice wide dispersion, so it covers the same 20 by 20 foot area as the microphone itself does. You do still have onboard IntelliMix DSP, so you've got all the same echo cancellation and other DSP features that you had on the 920. You just don't have as many pickup zones. You've got one instead of multiple. And this also is certified for Teams and Zoom, so this is sort of our one and done suggestion. So if you've got a small or medium sized room, this goes in, one cable, one power source through PoE plus, and you're pretty much finished.
Yeah, and good point. And really, like from an integrator's perspective, I'm sure we have some integrators on the call here. The 902 is a good opportunity to go back to clients where maybe the MXA 920 was out of scope for the types of rooms that they were looking for. The 902 is a great option to kind of go back and say, hey, Shure has this new solution for your smaller to medium-sized rooms where a single one of these would be sufficient for the space that it's in. But from the IT manager's perspective, if you're not contracting an integrator, you can install this yourself with pretty minimal effort. It's basically drop in, and as Chris said, single Cat5 cable that powers both the loudspeaker and the microphone. So it's a good option.
Right. And the fact that you only need to mount one thing in the ceiling, you don't need to
Yep.
go mount loudspeakers separately and
Exactly.
so forth. And then the alternative form factor is the MXA 710. If a big square or a big round microphone don't fit in with the architecture or the ceiling design or just the aesthetics of the room, the 710 is a nice alternative because it's very slim form factor, actually comes in two sizes, 2 feet and 4 feet. And this gives you steerable coverage, but rather than sort of directed lobes that are beams, it's more like arcs or half circles of coverage. So you can spread those out to cover a nice wide area, not so much zooming in on a particular person or a
Exactly.
few people. This is a great choice for lecture halls where you need to pick up student questions, but you don't need to have a laser pickup on each individual student. You just need to get everybody in an area.
Yep.
And it's got some default coverage templates built in so that you may not need to do much adjusting of that once you mount it anyway.
Yep.
All right, and then the stem ceiling option is really nice for people who are either doing the job themselves or are a little bit more constrained as far as the budget goes and don't have elaborate coverage needs, where a small, medium, large coverage beam is going to be sufficient for the room. You can easily mount one stem ceiling microphone. You can either hang it or mount it in the ceiling, whichever works best for the room. It's got built-in signal processing, not quite as sophisticated and elaborate as IntelliMix DSP, but also does some automatic mixing and sounds really nice. The fact that you can daisy chain these through the stem hub express box lets you combine the outputs from more than one stem ceiling microphone. So if you need 2 or 3 in a large classroom or a training room or something like that, it's really no problem. The other thing that the STEM ecosystem does really well is it's got some very user-friendly software applications that you can use before the installation to plan out and figure how many microphones you're going to need to cover the room adequately, as well as setting up the microphones once you've got them in the room, and then even measuring the coverage strength to make sure that you have adjusted the microphones properly, with those narrow, medium, and wide patterns, and that you're getting the coverage that you want everywhere in the room. So it's a very user-friendly approach, definitely less expensive than the MXA components. So it just opens up some new options for customers that maybe are doing a lot of rooms and don't want to spend as much money, or just have a couple of rooms and the in-house IT team is going to be handling the job themselves.
Yep.
All right. So let's, and here it is all in a nutshell.
Yeah, this is a good
just kind of the
summary.
summary.
Kind of,
Yep.
yeah, of everything we talked about. A lot of the considerations from the past couple slides we talked about, room size, the types of coverage, camera tracking, voice lift, all those considerations, kind of there on the far left column, and then which ceiling mic would be applicable for that. So yeah, 4 options, and we feel that it kind of covers all of the various applications. We think we have a solution basically for kind of any situation. So just starting at the top there, as far as room coverage or how big of a space are you covering? So the 920 offers the largest coverage by default, which is 30 by 30. 902 is 20 by 20. 710, we have 2 lengths, like Chris said. The 4-foot gives you up to 20 by 20, and then the stem ceiling is 25 by 25. As far as how you deploy the coverage, that's also different among the various models. We kind of touched on it as we went. The 920, again, is like Chris said, the Swiss Army knife. It's going to give you the most flexibility in options. It comes out of the box in that single zone automatic coverage, so it gives you a 30 by 30 box basically by default. But you can also customize that coverage for more complex spaces. Whereas the 902 is kind of the opposite of that, was really designed with simplicity in mind. So therefore you only get that single zone automatic coverage, and you can't really manipulate that. You can drag that 20 by 20 box around, but not shape it to a different dimension. If you're doing advanced camera, so if you're in these larger, more complex spaces where you're going to have camera tracking and voice lift, 920 is really the best option for you, where it provides XYZ coordinates for talker position and also gives you the ability to do voice lift. So really that's kind of reserved to the flagship model, the 920. So if you're doing any of that, typically you're in a complex space anyways, and you're probably already familiar with MXA as well. Yeah, the lone microphone with a loudspeaker built in. It's really the lone microphone because it's actually the world's first ceiling array with loudspeaker built in. So this is your only option if you want that, is the 902, and that's great for small to mid-sized spaces. Chris talked a little bit about the codec certification, so Zoom and Teams, stuff like that. If you need that, that's really the MXA category. You're going to be in that kind of ecosystem. If that's not as important for you, STEM would be a good choice. And then we got some form factor options there on the bottom. So kind of a good summary of everything we talked about today.
Right. But Cheryl, I'm sure there's questions.
There are a lot of questions.
What do people want to know?
So many things. All right, for this first one, I'm actually going to bop back to that previous slide because I think it's going to be helpful. Oops, not that one, that one. Be helpful in answering this, especially this first question. I need a Shure array that will be used in Zoom sessions, and it must integrate, control, or follow with a camera. Any recommendations?
Yep, that's going to be the 920.
All right, easy peasy.
Yep, if you need a microphone that provides coordinates, that's going to be the 920.
Okay.
Yep.
I believe this question is specifically about the MXA 902. Is there an ability to daisy chain these for multiple units? This is an absolutely great product to see that combines the mic and speakers and also doesn't require a lot of hardware. But chaining to the 2 and a very max 4 would make this product suitable for so many spaces.
Yeah, that's a totally valid question, and the answer is not at this point. And the reason being that this is somewhat power hungry because it's got both the loudspeaker and microphone to power. It really needs PoE plus, and for that, it's single home runs back to a switch. But yeah, you're not the first person to ask about that, so that's something we're thinking about.
Great.
And we should. There's probably another question in there about, can I use multiple 902s in one space? And regardless of the power issues, the answer is no, you can't, because what makes the 902 work interaction wise and echo cancellation wise is the fact that the microphone knows that the sound is coming from that loudspeaker and that loudspeaker only. If it's also hearing sound from other loudspeakers in different places, then the interactivity starts to collapse. So it needs to be a one-to-one relationship between the mic and the speaker and not additional units. But lots of people have asked for that. So, I'm sure the engineers are sharpening their pencils and scratching their heads right now.
Yep.
Great. All right. Next question. Since we're dealing with transducers in a line, are we looking at levels that fall off more like 3 dB per doubling?
It's an interesting question. I don't know.
That is a question. I don't think I know the answer.
I don't think I know it either, actually.
But that's a good question, and that'll show up in our list of questions, Cheryl, and maybe we can post that one or respond to that person directly.
Sure. Yeah, we can certainly do that. All right. Next question. Is the 20 by 20 coverage, I'm guessing again this is for the MXA 902, is that coverage based on deployment at a certain height above the talkers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, it is. It's based on 9 feet. Yep.
So does that coverage area change depending on how high it's?
Yeah, if you think of a beamforming mic like a flashlight beam, the higher you lift that flashlight up off the floor, the wider that beam becomes. So yeah, that 20 by 20 is based on a 9 foot mounting height.
And in the demo room across the hall from the booth, we had one mounted at, I think it was 11 feet, and it seemed like it was covering more about 25 by 25. So
Yep.
it does change slightly with ceiling height, but somewhere
Yep.
in that 9 to 11 feet is the sweet spot.
Yeah, and this may or may not be a question in the chat, but since we're on this topic, it's definitely relevant to this. Somebody might have asked, like, what's the recommended max mounting height for the MXA 902? That's an important question because it has everything to do with how loud you're going to need your loudspeaker to be. So for that, we kind of recommend a max mounting height of 12 feet. Because anything above that, you're really going to have to drive that loudspeaker pretty loud, and that's going to just put more strain on the AEC, the acoustic echo cancellation processing going on. So yeah, 12 feet max.
Right.
Hopefully that was a question and I got ahead of that one.
I don't see it, but I've got quite a few. So.
All right. Keep them
All
coming.
right. Next question. On the topic of camera tracking, it is my understanding that the MXA 902 is not ideal for it, but could it potentially work with the data it provides for systems like Seer Vision's audio tracking, especially for smaller rooms of less than 10 people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as it stands right now, the MXA 902 is actually not reporting any camera tracking or I guess talker coordinate position. It's not reporting any of that. So technically at this point the answer is no, but it is possible. So I think that's something we are interested in hearing more about and looking into for future updates for the 902. So.
Okay, great. Can you provide a link to or information on where they can find the MS Teams site for the certification?
Yeah. So I think if you just Google Microsoft Teams certified devices, it can get a little tricky. There's like if you just Google that, it's the first link, Microsoft Teams enabled devices. But what you have to do is on the left-hand side, there's some options for device category. It's actually listed under the room systems accessories. So if you click that link, it'll give you a list of all manufacturers kind of in that bucket, and then you can filter by Shure. I don't believe that the 902 is there yet. I think that's just because it's so new, but it is in fact certified on Teams. I think it's just a logistical thing of getting it on that website, if that's what the question was geared towards.
Yeah. Great. I've got a couple of questions about any future plugins partnerships. Not sure if those are something we can answer or not, but I'll present them to you. And if not, we'll just say we can't answer them.
Sure.
Are there any plans for QSys plugins or partnerships?
Yeah. So QSys is something that we're keenly aware of, and we are working to get some relationships going there and some integration going as well. We are working on something with the MXA 920. I would say for that one, reach out to whoever your Shure contact is, whether it's a rep or whether it's somebody directly at Shure that you have contact with, like an applications or sales person. Reach out because they're going to be able to give you more information on the timeline for that. But yeah, that's something that we are working on.
And then another question about, are there any plans to get certified by WebEx?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know that I could answer that at this time. I could definitely check on that, and if we can follow up, if we have that ability, we could certainly do that.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You mentioned a single cable for the MXA 902. What breakout to analog or USB do you recommend for the connection to a Teams or room computer device? Sorry, I stumbled over that one.
Yeah, so no, it's good. So a single cat powers the 902 over PoE Plus, so that'll be its own home run back to a network switch. And then separately, actually, that's a good point. What we are certified for Zoom and Teams with is with our ANI USB, which is just a little black box. And for all intents and purposes, it's just an audio interface. It gives you the ability to get into the computer that's running Teams or Zoom. So that's definitely what's going to be recommended. And then there is analog I/O on the ANI, but there is not any analog I/O on the microphone. So, okay. And that's all through Dante as well. So,
all right. Can you explain the daisy chain again for STEM?
Yeah, so with the STEM Hub Express, you can connect multiple devices through a switch and then into the STEM Hub Express. And I can't remember the maximum number of devices you can combine. Might be 10. But that's how you do like say you have a couple of STEM ceiling microphones and then 4 STEM loudspeakers, in the ceiling or on the walls or whatever. That's how you assemble all those things together, is through the STEM Hub Express. That's sort of the central brain.
Okay. Can you go a little more into the differences between the built-in processing of the STEM ceiling mic versus the built-in IntelliMix on the MXA 902?
Good question.
That is a good one, and that might be a better question for the STEM customer happiness team, because they know more in detail than I do. It is not as sophisticated as IntelliMix in terms of echo cancellation power and so forth, and I don't think it gives you as many options to customize sound in terms of EQ and adjusting all the parameters of noise reduction and so forth. So you don't have quite as much flexibility, but the same basic building blocks are there. But it's probably a better question for them, actually, so I may punt that one.
All right. Another question about certifications. Are there any plans for STEM to get teams certified?
That's a good question.
Not in the near term, as far as I know. The process is pretty rigorous and requires the ability to meet several very specific performance metrics as far as signal levels, interactivity, and so forth. And I don't know if the STEM products meet that out of the box. But now that STEM is part of the Shure brand, we're definitely looking towards improving STEM product line as we move forward, and that could easily be something that we add in the future.
Okay, great. What tracking cameras are compatible with the XYZ coordinates?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of like if you think of Teams and Zoom as like you could really use any microphone with Teams and Zoom. If you think of it like that, any camera tracking system that can receive coordinates would work. But as far as like official partnerships go, we are currently working with One Beyond, which if you're not familiar was acquired by Crestron. I think that was last March. But yeah, we do have an official partnership with them. Also, Aver. Aver Technologies is another PTZ camera company that we have like an official integration with, and then the third one is Yalink. And that actually might be a good webinar in the future to think about, because each one kind of has its own benefits, much like kind of what you're seeing on screen here. There's some specific pros to using with each one. But yeah, really any camera tracking system that can receive coordinates can be used.
Okay. With the MXA 920, do I still need a P300 or other DSP for combining multiple units?
Yeah, so you could, if you want advanced processing that goes beyond what's built into the 920, the P300 is definitely going to be your choice. You could get away with an Annie, I think that has 4 discrete Dante inputs, so you could take the auto mixed output from 4 separate 920s and just let the 920s do all of the processing and go into an Annie. So I guess not technically required, but to use a P300, but the P300 is definitely the powerhouse as far as processing goes. So I think it's just a matter of whether or not the 920 is meeting your needs as far as processing goes. So.
Okay. What is the recommended minimum spacing from ceiling-mounted loudspeakers when using the MXA 920, MXA 710, and STEM ceiling microphones?
Ooh, that's a really good one. Chris, have we ever done any like white papers or anything on that?
I don't know that we have. And obviously the other variable that would need to be considered is the room acoustics and how reflective the room is and the level of the speakers. That's a great question. I think our market development team would probably have more real world experience with
Yeah.
what separation is practical, in the field. My guess is it's probably something on the order of 4 feet or so, maybe at the minimum. But I don't want you to quote me on that because I haven't dealt with it as much as they have.
Yep. Or just don't think about it all and just use the 902.
There you go.
No, I'm just
I know we kind of touched on this, but it seems like a couple of more questions came in. So just kind of talking more about daisy chaining and combining mics. Can you combine multiple 902s? Which of these mics can be daisy chained? If so, how many can be daisy chained? Just sort of a lot of questions around those topics.
Yeah, no problem. We can address that. So as far as daisy chaining goes, and just to be clear, when we're talking daisy chaining, it's a single home run back to a network switch, and through that single connection, it's powering all subsequent microphones in that line. You don't have none of the MXA microphones do that, so you need to do a single home run per microphone to the switch. The stem, if you're looking for daisy chaining, is going to be the option for that. As far as using multiples in a room, really your only limitation is with the 902. Everything else can be scaled to however many is needed for the room, but the 902 is really kind of designed to be used in singles for like a specific use case. So,
all right.
Yep.
Can you describe ceiling height limitations with these different microphones?
Yeah, so like I kind of alluded to before, if you think about the coverage like a flashlight beam, the higher the microphone goes, the wider that beam kind of becomes, and the more noise and the more stuff is going to be kind of in the mix. So really, it's for that reason that we have recommended max mounting heights, because that's what we've deemed as the optimal maximum setting basically for these devices. So and I touched on this before, but the 920 and I believe the 710 as well both have the same max mounting height spec, which I think is 16 feet. But because now we have the loudspeaker in the mix on the 902, that's why it's a max mounting height of 12 feet is recommended.
And we should just also mention the different mounting hardware options.
True.
Make it easier to, if you've got a ceiling that's particularly tall, to drop the microphone down either with wire rope or a pedestal mount or
Projector pole.
A pole mount or whatever. It's pretty easy to drop it down by whatever distance you need to get the microphone at the optimum height. And
Exactly.
and all of our measurements assume that people are seated in the room and therefore, roughly 4 feet above the floor.
All right, great information. Should echo cancellation be turned off in Zoom and/or Teams?
Well, that's actually a great question. You don't need to worry about that for the devices that are Zoom and Teams certified. And that's actually one of the reasons we as manufacturers look for that certification, is because when you receive that certification, you actually are whitelisted in Teams and Zoom, and it becomes intelligent enough to know that, oh, you're using a 920. I'm going to turn the AEC off in the codec and let the microphone do the processing, so you won't have that battling of DSP going on. Yep.
Okay, great. Let's see. We kind of talked about this. There's a specific question though. I want the 920 because I need camera tracking. What brands of camera will work? I use a 910 with an eagle eye camera in another room. It works well, but with the new room is a long rectangle, so I might need 2 cameras to see both sides of the conference table.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that specific brand, but yeah, it sounds like you're obviously doing it already. I think it's just a matter of configuration in that camera's software. You probably have to go in and set zones that you want the cameras to be. If I'm just kind of making a broad assumption without knowing that software firsthand. Where you'll be able to scale up to multiple cameras and probably link it. If you're using multiple microphones, you'll be able to say like, all right, if I detect sound from this microphone, then I want this camera to do the tracking. So I would recommend reaching out to whatever manufacturer that camera software for their recommended steps.
Yeah, it partly depends on what type of information the camera is capable of understanding. If it can only understand that, oh, when microphone lobe 3 is active, I point to preset number 3, then you would need to use the lobe activation data from the 920 to tell you where it should point, to tell the camera. If it can take in the X, Y, and Z coordinates and make some intelligent decision about, okay, if the coordinates are within this range, that's camera angle number 6, or the camera just smartly says, okay, I know where that is in the room, I'm going to point there. Some camera systems are smarter than others.
Okay. Can we embed or mix audio from shared content such as a laptop or PC to the MXA 902 via Dante?
You can, yeah, actually. So there are two discrete loudspeaker inputs. So you could route, program audio and far end audio as two discrete inputs to the loudspeaker to be output singly. So yes, you can do that.
Okay. In Designer, when you use the MXA 710 4-foot, the coverage is up to 12 by 12 meters. Do you recommend this coverage?
12 meters. So that would be 40 by
Roughly
40.
About
Yeah.
40
So
by 40 feet.
yeah, that's yeah. No, I wouldn't recommend that. It's really the up to 20 by 20 in reality with the 4-foot version. So yeah.
Yeah, to get that wide, you'd have to have your lobes splayed quite widely, which mathematically might cover that much, but again, it's going to depend on how good does that room sound. Can you pick up someone at a steep angle like that off to the side? Maybe in that room you can. In a lot of rooms, though, you're going to want the lobes a little bit more directly aimed.
Yep.
Okay. Can you talk about two MXA 920s in a large, long room with sound reinforcement coming from ceiling speakers? Will there be issues with loudspeaker feedback?
Yeah, that's the whole point of acoustic echo cancel reference or AEC reference. That's the whole point for that to not be a problem. And actually, that's a very common use case of the 920. We see that all the time, these large spaces with loudspeakers. So yeah, no issues there.
And that's sort of predicated on the idea that you're going to probably split the sound system so that, MXA 920 number 1 at one end of the room is feeding the speakers at the other end of the room, and not the speakers in its own zone, or at least at, much lower levels to the speakers in its own zone, because that's the balance that's going to prevent feedback from occurring.
Great. Evan, I think we lost your feed. I see your name is still here. I hope we didn't lose Evan. Let's try and keep going, and hopefully Evan will pop back shortly. Oops. Okay. In regards to STEM, here's a comment. So in regards to STEM being quote unquote certified, we use STEM tables through WebEx into a Cisco room kit pretty frequently, and they work great. So just a fun little commentary there. Are there any plans to put camera tracking into the STEM ceiling product?
I don't know, but if there were, we probably wouldn't talk about it anyway.
That is true. Since the ANI USB is based on the Ultimo chipset, hey, welcome back, Evan.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I was just worried you lost me.
Wandering into the mix, so I had to deal with that situation. Sorry.
We all know that story quite well over the past couple of years. No problem. Since the ANI USB is based on the Ultimo chipset, it can only receive two Dante flows, correct? Meaning only two MXA 920 can send their respective auto mix outputs to an ANI USB, and 3+ units would require P300, correct?
Let's unpack that for a second. Let me pull this up.
I was told there would be no math in this webinar, and
it's okay. That's why we have Evan, Chris. That's why we have Evan.
Yeah, can we move to the next? I'm going to pull some stuff up here to answer that. Let's move to the next one.
Okay. So I think this is, okay, I think this was another question sort of about sort of the discrepancies on the 710. 710 4-foot and 920 have the same distance to talker listed. Why is the room size listed different on the PowerPoint slide?
So you're talking about designer shows the ability to capture up to that 12 by 12 meter versus us saying 6 by 6
I
meters.
think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that we could work to improve. I mean, you could technically pick something up in that wide of a space. It's just how good is that actually going to be? And that's really what we're saying here is that for best results is going to be that max 6 by 6 meters or 20 by 20 feet. So.
All right.
Yep.
And then did you want to go back to that any USB question?
Yeah, so can you read it back to me one more time?
Sure. Since the ANI USB is based on the Ultimo chipset, it can only receive 2 Dante flows, correct? Is that correct?
You have four inputs. Let's see here, transmit flow. Yeah, so maybe I did misspeak there because I'm seeing, yeah, what you're saying. It's 2 unicast transmit flows on the Ultimo. Yeah, so I guess first, yes, it is using the Ultimo chipset. So that is limited to 2 unicast transmit flows, but you do have 4 discrete Dante inputs available on ANI as well. So what's the rest of that question?
Meaning only 2 MXA 920 can send their respective auto mix outputs to the ANI USB.
I haven't done a ton of testing with that. I have done at least 2, but what I'm seeing in Designer is the ability to send 4. Yeah, I'm just pulling it up here. Yeah, it does have 4 inputs. So I think in theory you would be able to do 4 auto mixed outputs into the ANI. Unless, Chris, do you know something I don't know maybe on that one?
No, and I was just thinking that Joel in applications engineering, who is the master of Dante flows, is probably the ideal person to ask that question.
Yeah.
And that's a good time for me to jump in because we are running out of time, and I think there's a couple of questions that we're not going to get to or that I may have missed accidentally. And you can get in touch with that fantastic team that Joel is a part of, the Shure customer support applications team. You can get in touch with them and open a ticket with them by going to shure.com/contact. Again, that is shure.com/contact. There is a great team of folks there that can answer so many questions across so many different audio topics. It's a really great resource. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend when you have questions to reach out to them because they are great. So yeah, shure.com/contact for any questions. And then I'm just going to wrap this up with a fun little commentary here, which I think Chris and I are also very familiar with. How things have indeed changed from the 1997 article, Microphones on the Ceiling? Shure strongly advises no.
Yep.
We've certainly come a long way, and I think that's a testament to the engineering, the technology, and the software advances we've made.
No doubt. Yeah, and we've also been telling people not to put loudspeakers next to microphones either, and then we did the opposite of that too. So yeah.
We like to do the impossible. We like to tell you it's impossible and then figure it out, right?
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris and Evan, for all of your great information. And thank you for everyone who attended. We hope you learned a little something. I know I certainly did. And we hope to see you on our next webinar. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.